Okay, so today we'll discuss regarding the RBAC. RBAC stands for Role-Based Access Control. Just like in AWS, how we have IAM. For AWS services, we are going to give the permissions to the users and those policies, all those roles we are creating. So now in the Kubernetes cluster, like if we install the Kubernetes cluster, we are logging as an administrator, but we may have different developers or other monitoring teams, support team. Okay, so they also want to access the Kubernetes cluster, but we don't want to give all the permissions for all of those. Okay, so then we need to create the permissions, all those, okay, using RBAC. So what is the meaning of RBAC? What is the meaning of RBAC?
Role-based access control.
The role-based access control can be done through RBAC. Okay, so for that purpose, we are going for the RBAC, all the users, all those we need to define. Okay, so we can create a role and a cluster role binding, and a cluster role binding. Okay, so these are all the resources we are going to create in the RBAC. We have 4 types of resources we have. One is role, second one is cluster role, third one is role binding, and last one is cluster role binding. Okay, so what are these resources we'll discuss. If we go for the role, okay, so what is the purpose of role is if the resource is at the namespace level, for the namespace level resources, we want to define the permissions. Okay, so those permissions we can give through role. Okay, so if the namespace based resources we have. Okay, so for those we need to give the permissions using
namespace.
No. Role to create. If it is the some of the resources are not at namespace level, the scope is cluster level. For those resources, if we want to give the permissions, then we need to choose
cluster roles.
Cluster role. So what is the difference between role and the cluster role is the permissions we are defining at namespace level resources, like mostly pods, otherwise services, deployments, daemon sets, stateful sets. These all the scope is namespace level. Okay. So if I give a permission for one namespace, I may not get the same pod access maybe for other namespace pod and other namespace service. Okay. So then I have production namespace and dev namespace. For developers, I don't give the access much to the production namespace. Maybe even if I give also, I'll give the basic details, maybe to read like that only. Okay. So like this, we can create the roles. So some resources we don't have scope at some resources we don't have scope at namespace level. Secrets, so those all we have at the cluster level. We have the permissions. For those, we need to choose
cluster role.
Cluster role. Okay, so then for those resources, we need to go for the cluster role itself. So now this is the what is the role name?
Defaults.
No. This is the known name is pod reader. Namespace is default. Okay, for which resource we are giving the permission here? For pods. Okay, so then I want to give for deployments also. I want to give for services. So like this, for the services, for all these, we can give the permissions. Okay, so what are the actions or verbs we can do here? Get, watch, and list. Are we able to create here? We are not able to create it. So this is only a pod reader kind of permission. This is only a pod reader. Kind of permission. Okay. So what are the verbs or total kind of permissions we can give? We'll discuss. Yeah. So now here if I give all these, then what I can do is, as of now for the pod reader, we didn't give the create kind of permissions or update kind of permissions, delete, patch, this kind of permissions we didn't give because he is only a pod reader. If you want to give the full permissions, then give all these permissions. Okay, so maybe create one more. Okay, here my namespace is production namespace. Okay, here I want to give all the permissions I want to give. Okay, so like this, I can create one more role. In the same way, we can define even the cluster role also. Okay, so cluster scope like a namespace, otherwise secrets. For all these, we are going to create. Okay, so now here for the secret resource, the resource is secret, and we are going to give the permission for the secrets. We can give the permissions. Resource is secret. Okay, so maybe for config map also I want to give that. For that also I want to give the read permissions. Then in the resources keep config map also. So those are the kind of resources what we have discussed or created all these days. Are you able to understand? Hmm. So what is the difference between cluster role and role is depends upon the namespace. Depends upon the namespace level we are going to create the resources. Okay, so then after you create the roles or cluster roles, need to assign to users or groups role binding. Okay, after we create these roles, we need to attach to
Role bindings and cluster role
to
bindings.
the users or groups. For that, we need to go for role binding or
Cluster role binding.
cluster role binding. Okay, so for that we need to go for the role binding or the cluster role binding we need to use. Okay, so for this we need to create the users. So just even in the AWS also first we'll have the policies, and those policies have been inbuilt. Here we created the roles itself. Okay, which of the permissions we want to give like this. Then these need to be attached to the users or
Groups.
to the groups also. In the real time, better to go for the groups. Okay, so why we'll attach to the groups is we'll get the similar kind of permissions to all the users. So if it is a role, then role binding. If it is a cluster role binding. So if it is a role, we need to create a role binding. And if it is a cluster role, okay, so here role binding and cluster role binding. The kind is here who is the what is the kind of the user, and the username is the pod reader role. Okay, we are attaching to user. What is the username? What is the username?
Jane.
Jane is the username. Has been attached to pod reader. Role is pod reader. Already we created the pod reader role, right? To the Jane user, we are binding. If we have multiple users also, we can add there. Okay, so this kind of binding is called as
Role binding.
the role binding. If we have a cluster role, the cluster role binding also we can do. So now here we are not attached the cluster role binding to the user. So even if you want to attach, you can attach to the user also. But here this has been attached to
Groups.
the groups. Okay, so to the group that has been attached. What is the group name?
Manager.
What is the group name here?
Manager.
Yeah, manager is the group name. Then we are going to give the cluster role binding either to the users also we can attach, or to the groups also we can attach. So like this, we need to give the permissions. Then if they log in, okay. If we are using EKS, then even we can use the IAM roles also we can use. Okay, instead of going for RBAC rules, even we can use IAM rules also we can use. Okay, so this also we can use in order to administrate. Okay. So now we troubleshooted till the pods and those. Say if the parts are working fine, but we may have the problem with the services. So first we troubleshooted at the cluster level, any problems are there. Later at the pod level, deployments, all those we have checked. Okay, then parts are in the back end, those are working fine, but maybe services are not able to expose them. Services are not able to expose. Okay, so those things you need to troubleshoot. Okay, so those things you need to troubleshoot. So first we check the parts and parts, everything is working fine. Okay, so kubectl get SVC or get service and that service name. Then we need to troubleshoot from the ingress resources also we need to troubleshoot. It get service. Service name, we need to check the service name. Maybe any network policy. From axing, any network policy has been axing and DNS issues are there. Cube proxy is the service, whether that is running or not. And whether the service endpoints are available or still those are in the does the service have the endpoints or not. So parts already we have troubleshooted. Okay, then is the queue proxy has been working fine or not? So we need to check it whether the queue proxy is running because this service is responsible to expose the parts. Okay, say is queue proxy has been running or not. And maybe any firewalls or IP tables are problem. Okay, after that, need to check the So which ingress controller we may use is Nginx ingress controller, those ingress controller logs also. We need to check the ingress controller logs also. We need to check. Then we need to ingress rules have been configured properly or not. Okay, so those also we need to check it. The ingress logs mostly will go to that ingress controller is running as the controller. Okay, that logs we need to get it. kubectl log that pod and enter inside that ingress controller and any logs or any problem we have. And from the monitoring also we need to get all these. The pod is working fine, service is also is working fine. Then we need to go to ingress. kubectl that get that ingress and what are the rules we have. And what is the load balancer? We have backend ingress will also attach the load balancer. Okay, then we may need to troubleshoot not for this. If the stateful state those are in the pending state, troubleshooting PV and PVC also has been working fine or not also. We need to troubleshoot. So troubleshoot from the PV and PVC wise also we need to troubleshoot. So these are the different troubleshooting we are going to perform. Then come to eksworkshop.com. Okay, so here in the eksworkshop.com, so you can go to introduction. So most of the EKs, what we can do, the lab, all these they have given. Okay, so follow these steps. Start an AWS event or in our own account. We are doing in the okay. So better to choose in these regions, US West 2 or US West East 2. Okay, so these all the steps to try to do. Okay, and try to create an EKS setup also, EKS cluster setup. So follow these guides to create an EKS cluster. Before, as of now, use default VPC itself. So from the management console, try to create an EKS cluster. Otherwise, we can use to provision the EKS cluster also Terraform. The provision and EKS cluster. The another method how we can do is Terraform also has given one like module for EKS. Using this also, we already done the Terraform, right? So using the Terraform, try to initialize. So just you need to clone that in this tutorial. What is the clone they have given? Okay, and try to provision that Terraform configure, like AWS configure you do, then Terraform init plan and apply. So with that Terraform need to provision. Okay. So try to do the Terraform. Sorry, first EKS GUI try to provision. Later through Terraform try to provision the EKS cluster. Otherwise, in the EKS workshop also, these all the steps you can do. With that, we can provision the EKS clusters. We need to use the different ways of provisioning the cluster. Okay.
And so manually also we were doing, right?
Come again.
Manually we were also doing that, right? Before. Manual installation.
Yeah, manual through GUI you can try.
Yeah.
GUI first try before doing this. Later go for this. Okay. So tomorrow we'll see this.